Imagine discovering a secret so profound it changes everything you thought you knew about your life. A secret that shakes the foundation of your faith, your family, and the trust you've built over years. This is the story of Michael Reed, a devoted pastor in Florida, whose life revolved around his unwavering beliefs and the love of his family. To his community, he was a symbol of integrity and morality, a man who seemed to have it all. A strong marriage, 5 wonderful children, and a thriving congregation. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect life lay a truth waiting to be uncovered. A seemingly innocent family project would become the catalyst for a revelation so devastating that it would unravel everything Michael held dear. What happens when trust is shattered? When the very people you love the most betray you in unimaginable ways? This is a story of devotion, tested, faith questioned, and a man pushed to his breaking point. Stay with us as we explore a tale of betrayal and loss. A chilling reminder that even the strongest foundations can crumble under the weight of hidden truths. Michael Reed, 43, was a man whose life seemed to embody the virtues he preached. As the lead pastor of St. Luke's Community Church in Tampa, Florida, he was deeply admired for his heartfelt sermons that touched on faith, family, and the power of resilience. Week after week, his words drew people from all walks of life, offering them hope and guidance in times of uncertainty. Michael's dedication extended far beyond the pulpit. With his wife Rachel, 39, by his side, they were seen as a shining example of a strong, faith-centered family. Rachel was not just a devoted partner, she was a constant presence in their church community. Whether leading women's ministry events, organizing charity drives, or managing church programs, she supported Michael every step of the way. Their 5 children, Isabel, 16, Michael Jr., 14, Jacob, 12, Olivia, 9, and Ethan, 6, added to the family's reputation as a cornerstone of the community. Isabel, the eldest, was academically driven and often involved in youth programs at the church. Michael Jr. was more reserved but deeply caring, always lending a hand wherever he could. Jacob was the playful and curious middle child, while Olivia's kindness and sensitivity made her a favorite among her peers. Little Ethan, the youngest, was the light of the family, adored by his siblings and congregation members alike. But at the heart of Michael's journey was his father, Charles Reed, 66, a man who had shaped much of who he was. Charles was a revered elder in the church, known for his wisdom and steadfast faith. From a young age, Michael looked up to his father, learning the importance of integrity, family, and unwavering belief. During his sermons, Michael often credited Charles as the rock of their family, the one who had laid the foundation for their shared values. The Reed household was vibrant and lively, filled with laughter, devotion, and a shared commitment to their faith. Sunday dinners at Charles's home were a cherished tradition, a time for prayer, reflection, and conversations about the future of their community. For Michael, these moments symbolized the strength of his family bond and their unity under the guidance of faith. To the outside world, Michael's life seemed perfect, a beacon of what could be achieved through devotion and belief. Yet, as we'll come to learn, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the surface of this ideal family lay secrets waiting to be uncovered, secrets that would soon unravel everything Michael held dear. It was a warm Sunday evening in their suburban Tampa home, and the Reed family had gathered around the dining table. As usual, the room was filled with the hum of conversation, the clatter of dishes, and the occasional burst of laughter. For Michael Reed, moments like these were what he cherished most, a chance to connect with his family and bask in the joy of their togetherness. Amid the cheerful chaos, Isabel, the eldest at 16, spoke up, her voice filled with excitement. "For my genealogy project at school," she began, "I thought it would be fun if we all did a DNA test. We could learn about our ancestry and maybe even find some distant relatives." Her younger siblings lit up with enthusiasm. Michael Jr., 14, nodded in agreement, while Jacob, 12, chimed in with guesses about royal bloodlines. Olivia, 9, wondered aloud about their family's history, and Ethan, just 6, giggled at the idea of discovering someone famous in their lineage. The energy in the room was contagious. Michael, ever the supportive father, smiled warmly. "That sounds like a fantastic idea, Isabel. It'll be a great way to learn more about where we come from." and it'll definitely help with your project. As the children buzzed with excitement, Rachel's smile faltered slightly. She reached for her glass of water, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly. Clearing her throat, she said softly, "I'm not sure, Isabel. These things aren't always accurate and, well, they can be invasive." Her hesitation seemed out of place in an otherwise light-hearted moment. Michael glanced at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "Come on, Rachel," he said, brushing off her concerns with a reassuring tone. "What's the harm? It's just a fun family activity. Besides, it'll be good for Isabel's project." He placed a comforting hand over hers, offering a gentle smile. "We've got nothing to hide." Rachel hesitated, her eyes flickering to Charles, who sat quietly at the head of the table. His expression was unreadable, but there was a subtle tension in his posture, a tightness in his jaw, and a silence that seemed unusual for him. After a long pause, Rachel nodded reluctantly. "All right," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the children's cheers of excitement. Michael wasted no time, pulling out his phone to order the DNA kits online. The children were thrilled, already imagining the stories they might uncover about their family's past. Charles, however, offered only a tight-lipped smile, sipping his coffee in silence as the lively conversation swirled around him. What began as a simple suggestion for a school project seemed harmless on the surface. But Rachel's unease and Charles's silence hinted at something far more complex. The decision to proceed with the DNA tests would set in motion a chain of events that none of them could have anticipated. A catalyst for revelations that would forever change the Reed family. The day the DNA results arrived, the Reed household buzzed with excitement. Isabel had spent the entire afternoon urging her siblings to gather in the living room, where the family computer sat ready to unveil their ancestry. Michael Reed stood behind the chair, Rachel by his side, as the children crowded around, eagerly awaiting the big reveal. "Okay, here we go," Michael said with a grin, clicking to open the results. Isabel leaned in, eyes wide with anticipation, while the younger children speculated about royal ancestors or long-lost relatives. The screen loaded, revealing the results in colourful charts and graphs. The family erupted in curiosity as they explored their ancestral origins and discussed connections to distant regions. "Look at this," Jacob exclaimed, pointing to a section of the report. "We might have Viking ancestors." Ethan giggled at the thought, while Olivia asked what Vikings even did. But as Michael continued scrolling through the data, his expression shifted. His smile faded, replaced by a furrowed brow. The room quieted as the children noticed the change in their father's demeanor. "Wait a minute," Michael murmured, leaning closer to the screen. His eyes darted between the lines of data, his tone now more serious. This says I'm not a genetic match to any of you kids." He laughed nervously, shaking his head. "That can't be right. Probably just some kind of database error." Rachel froze, her hand gripping the back of the chair. Her face paled, but she said nothing. Charles, sitting quietly in the corner, sipped his coffee, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Isabel," Michael said, his voice lighter now, as if to reassure himself as much as the others. "It's probably a mistake. These tests aren't perfect. Let's not jump to conclusions." "Do you think we should call the company, Dad?" Isabel asked, glancing at him with concern. Michael nodded quickly, closing the browser window. "Yes, of course. I'll reach out to them and get this sorted. I'm sure they'll clear it up." He placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder, offering her a reassuring smile, but her expression was unreadable. "Don't worry," he added, his tone firm. "It's nothing." Over the next few days, Michael contacted the genealogy company, explaining the anomaly in detail. Confident it was a simple error, he expected a quick correction. But when their response finally came, it left him reeling. The company representative, in a calm and measured tone, explained over the phone, "We've triple-checked the results. There's no mistake. The children's biological father is not you, but rather another close relative based on the markers submitted in your family's samples." Michael's heart sank. He gripped the edge of the desk, his thoughts racing. "Another close relative," he repeated, his voice barely audible. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The only possible match within their submitted samples was his father, Charles. His breath quickened as he ended the call, his mind racing back to moments he hadn't questioned before. Charles's frequent visits, Rachel's hesitation about the DNA test, and her unusual quietness whenever his father was around. It all began to make a horrifying kind of sense. Michael sat in stunned silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. The life he had built, his family, his faith, his pride, now felt like a carefully constructed illusion crumbling before his eyes. Michael Reed entered the living room, clutching the printed DNA results in his trembling hand. The weight of the discovery burned in his chest, a mix of disbelief, anger, and confusion churning within him. Rachel sat on the couch, folding laundry, unaware of the storm about to break. Without a word, Michael dropped the papers onto the coffee table. The sound startled Rachel, and she looked up, her eyes meeting his. The intensity in his gaze made her freeze. "Explain this," Michael said, his voice sharp and cold, each word laced with restrained fury. Rachel's eyes darted to the papers, and in an instant her face paled. She reached for them but hesitated, her hands trembling as if touching the evidence would confirm her worst fears. What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's voice rose, breaking through the tension in the room. "Don't play dumb, Rachel. The DNA results, they're saying I'm not the biological father of our children, but they also say the father is someone in my family. So, tell me, what the hell is going on?" Rachel's breath hitched as her grip tightened on the edge of the couch. Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head, as if denying the reality might make it disappear. "Michael," she started, her voice trembling, "there has to be a mistake. Those results, they can't be right." "There's no mistake," Michael interrupted, his voice booming. "I contacted the company. They verified it. Don't lie to me, Rachel. I want the truth, now." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's shoulders slumped, and the tears she had been holding back began to fall. Her hands trembled as she clutched the armrest, her head bowing under the weight of the moment. She drew a shaky breath before finally speaking. "It was Charles," she said, her voice breaking. "Your father." Michael's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked as if the air had been knocked out of him. "What?" he said, barely able to form the word. "It started early in our marriage," Rachel continued, her voice quivering with fear and shame. He manipulated me. I was young, Michael. He was so controlling, so overpowering. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't want to hurt you." Michael staggered back, as if her words were physical blows. His mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. "All 5 of them?" he demanded, his voice rising again. "You're telling me every one of them is his?" Rachel nodded slowly, her sobs now uncontrollable. "I never wanted this, Michael. I was trapped. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I just stayed quiet, I could protect you, protect the family." "Protect me?" Michael roared, his anger spilling over. "You call this protection? You let me live a lie. You let him sit at our table, around our children, as if he was a normal grandfather." Rachel's sobs deepened, but Michael couldn't stop. The betrayal was too deep, the pain too raw. His wife, the woman he had trusted more than anyone, had concealed a truth so devastating it tore at the fabric of his life. And his father, the man he had admired and revered, had been at the center of it all. Unable to stand the sight of Rachel's tear-streaked face, Michael turned away, his hands shaking as he gripped the back of a chair for support. The room spun around him as the enormity of the confession settled in. The foundation of his faith, his family, his very identity, everything he believed in was gone. Betrayed by the 2 people he trusted most, Michael felt the world he had built crumbling beneath his feet. Michael Reed sat alone in his car, parked at the edge of a quiet lake as the sun dipped below the horizon. The DNA results and Rachel's confession replayed in his mind like a relentless, inescapable loop. Every word, every moment cut deeper than the last. The people he had trusted most, his wife and his father, had shattered his life in ways he could never have imagined. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, Michael's knuckles turned white. His breath came in uneven gasps as waves of anger and despair crashed over him. He slammed his fists against the wheel, the sound echoing in the empty car. "Why?" he shouted into the silence, his voice breaking. "Why would they do this to me?" Tears streamed down his face as he leaned back, staring at the roof of the car, trying to make sense of it all. His faith, his family, the foundation of everything he had worked so hard to build. It had all been a lie. The man he had looked up to, who had guided him, who had taught him to live by the word of God, was the same man who had betrayed him in the most unforgivable way. The woman he had loved, the mother of his children, had carried this secret for years, letting him live in blissful ignorance. The anger came in searing bursts, followed by crushing grief. He thought of his children, their laughter, their innocence, the way they looked up to him. And now, the bitter truth. They weren't his. The thought gutted him. But even in his anguish, he knew he still loved them. They were his children, no matter what the DNA said. That love only deepened the betrayal. How could Rachel and Charles take that from him? Michael's mind raced back to the countless moments that now felt tainted. The family dinners at Charles's house, the smiles shared over Sunday lunches, the pride he had felt in the family they had built. All of it was stained by lies he hadn't seen. He screamed, the sound raw and guttural, releasing a fraction of the pain tearing him apart. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, scrolling aimlessly through photos of his family. Images of birthday parties, Christmas mornings and vacations stared back at him, mocking the life he thought he had. He dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, unable to bear the sight any longer. As the hours passed, the lake before him became shrouded in darkness, mirroring the turmoil in his heart. Michael sat in silence, his thoughts circling back to one haunting question. How had he missed it? Were there signs he had ignored? Was his trust in his father and wife so blind that he couldn't see the truth? The guilt, anger, and helplessness swirled together, an unbearable cocktail of emotions that left him suffocating. For a man who had spent his life preaching forgiveness and faith, the words now felt hollow. How could he forgive this? How could he find faith in a world where his own father and wife had betrayed him so deeply? The foundation of his beliefs was crumbling, leaving behind only doubt and despair. As the first light of dawn began to break, Michael remained motionless, staring out at the still water. The pain was no less intense, but now it was joined by something darker, an unsettling clarity. He couldn't ignore the betrayal. He couldn't simply move on. The question was no longer why this had happened, but what he was going to do about it. Michael stormed into the living room, his face a storm of emotions. Anger, disbelief, and pain all mingling into one. Rachel sat on the couch, her head bowed, hands gripping the edges of a pillow on her lap, as if it could anchor her in the moment. She had been dreading this confrontation, knowing it was inevitable. Michael stood before her, clutching the DNA results in one hand, his knuckles white from the grip. His voice, when he spoke, was low and trembling, each word sharper than the last. You knew this day would come, didn't you? You knew this would all come out. Rachel looked up, her eyes red and swollen from hours of crying. Michael, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. Let me explain. Explain what? Michael snapped, cutting her off. He threw the papers onto the coffee table, the sound reverberating in the tense silence. Explain how you let my father, the man I trusted more than anyone, violate our marriage? Explain how you kept this from me for years while I raised those kids, thinking they were mine? Explain that, Rachel. Tears spilled down Rachel's face as she tried to gather herself, but Michael's words hit her like blows. It wasn't like that, she stammered. I was trapped, Michael. He manipulated me. I didn't know how to stop it. Trapped. Michael's voice rose, his heartbreak spilling out as fury. You didn't know how to stop it? You could have told me. You could have said something, anything, but instead you chose to stay silent and let me live a lie. Rachel's sobs grew louder, but she forced herself to respond. I didn't want to destroy you, Michael. I didn't want to destroy our family. Michael laughed bitterly, a sound so unlike him that it startled Rachel. Destroy me? He repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You've already destroyed me, Rachel. You destroyed everything. Every sermon I preached, every Sunday dinner we had as a family, every moment I spent with those kids, all of it feels like a lie now. They're still your children. Rachel cried, desperation clear in her voice. Maybe not biologically, but you're their father in every way that matters. They love you, Michael. Michael shook his head, his jaw tightening as he tried to control the storm of emotions inside him. You don't get it, do you? He said, his voice quieter now, but no less filled with pain. It's not just about the kids. It's about you, and him, and everything you let happen. You took away my right to know the truth, Rachel. You took away my choice. Rachel stood, her knees shaking, as she tried to close the distance between them. "I love you, Michael," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this to happen. I was scared. Don't," Michael said, stepping back, his hand raised as if to physically block her words. "Don't you dare tell me you were scared. You weren't the only one in this marriage, Rachel. You weren't the only one with something to lose." Rachel's sobs became uncontrollable as she collapsed back onto the couch. Michael stood over her, his hands trembling, his chest heaving with the weight of his emotions. The silence between them was deafening, filled only by Rachel's quiet cries and Michael's labored breathing. After what felt like an eternity, Michael spoke again, his voice cold and distant. "I can't do this anymore, not with you." Rachel looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with despair. "Michael, please, don't say that. Don't give up on us." "There's nothing left to give up on," he said, his tone final. "You already gave it up the moment you let him into our lives like that." Without another word, Michael turned and walked out of the room, leaving Rachel alone in the suffocating silence. As the sound of his retreating footsteps echoed through the house, Rachel realized the depth of what had been broken, and that it might never be repaired. Michael's mind raced as he drove aimlessly through the streets of St. Petersburg, the storm of emotions inside him never quieting. Betrayal and heartbreak had a way of making everything feel like a haze, a fog of confusion that weighed heavily on his chest. The quiet hum of the car's engine did nothing to drown out the words from Rachel, the DNA results, and the shocking confrontation with his father. He had hoped for some semblance of understanding, some explanation, but the only thing he had received was more pain. The drive to Charles's house had felt like an eternity. Michael couldn't decide if it was the distance or the enormity of what had happened that made the drive stretch on. What was he hoping for, really? An apology? Redemption? He didn't know anymore. All he could think about was the man he had admired and loved, the man he had trusted above all others, and how that man had shattered everything he believed in. As Michael parked in front of Charles's modest home, the silence of the neighborhood pressed in on him. It was almost peaceful, the kind of peace that felt wrong in the wake of everything that had just been uncovered. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his fingers aching, before finally forcing himself out of the car. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last, his resolve hardening, knowing he was about to face the one person who had destroyed his world. Inside the house, Charles was calm as always, too calm for Michael's liking. He looked like the same man Michael had grown up with, the steady patriarch, the quiet leader. But now, all of that felt like a lie. When Charles saw the crumpled DNA results, his face drained of color. For a moment, Michael thought he might apologize, but that didn't happen. Instead, his father offered weak excuses and feigned confusion, and with every word Charles spoke, Michael's fury deepened, the wound of betrayal reopening. He had never imagined that his father, his role model, his guide, could be the one to destroy him. The shouting, the accusations, they all felt like an endless loop. Each moment was another attempt to force an answer out of Charles, but all Michael got was denial and shame. His father, still trying to justify the unforgivable, refused to acknowledge the depth of the hurt he'd caused. His attempt to protect Michael only made things worse. Then came the final blow, Charles's attempt to reach out to him, to touch him as if nothing had changed. Michael recoiled, every instinct in him screaming not to let this man touch him. He had betrayed him, his trust, his love, everything. "You're not the man I thought you were," Michael said quietly, his voice breaking with despair. "You're not my father, you're just a monster." The words were final, a verdict that sealed the last shred of hope he had for reconciliation. He didn't need to hear any more. As he turned to leave, he felt the weight of the finality pressing down on him. His father's face crumpled in regret. Or was it guilt? It didn't matter. Michael didn't stay long enough to find out. He didn't need to. The door slammed behind him, and as he got back into the car, the world seemed quieter somehow, emptier. With each mile he drove away from Charles's house, Michael felt the rift between them widen. His father was gone, and so was the man he had once been. In the rearview mirror, Michael could see the house fading in the distance. It might have been a home once, but now it was just another broken place, a symbol of everything he had lost. The days following the confrontations with Rachel and Charles were a blur of silence and sorrow in the Reed household. The once vibrant family home now felt cold and hollow, filled only with the echoes of words that could never be unsaid. Michael's absence was palpable. He had retreated into solitude, unable to face the family he had spent years building, but now felt had been stolen from him. Rachel stayed behind, her face drawn and pale, carrying the weight of her confession like a crushing burden. The children, too young to understand the full extent of the chaos, sensed the tension, but remained in the dark about the truth. They whispered questions to one another, their innocence shielded from the reality that their family was falling apart. Michael, unable to find solace at home, drove aimlessly through the streets of Tampa, the places that once brought him comfort. The church, the lake, even his father's home, now felt tainted. His thoughts swirled with a toxic mix of anger and grief. He avoided the church, knowing the congregation would sense the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. He felt like an imposter, standing in front of them and preaching faith and trust when his own had been destroyed. Word of the DNA results and the revelations about Charles began to spread through the community, despite Michael's efforts to keep the matter private. Rumors rippled like wildfire, whispered in hushed tones among the congregation. What had started as a story about a respected family now carried the weight of betrayal and scandal. Questions swirled about Michael's absence, Rachel's withdrawn demeanor, and the tension that hung over the Reed household. The church, once a refuge for the community, now felt fractured. Members whispered in the pews, their trust in their pastor shaken. Charles, who had been a pillar of wisdom and guidance, suddenly stopped attending services. His absence spoke volumes to those who had once revered him, fueling speculation about what had truly happened. Rachel tried to hold the family together, but every attempt to return to normalcy was met with resistance from Michael, who refused to engage with her. The children, sensing their parents' strain, withdrew into themselves. Isabel, the eldest, blamed herself for starting the DNA project. Michael Jr. and Jacob asked fewer questions, while Olivia and Ethan clung to Rachel, their small voices asking when their father would come home. For Michael, the weight of the betrayal was unbearable. His once steadfast faith had been shaken to its core. The foundation of his beliefs, family, trust, and the sanctity of marriage felt irreparably broken. He questioned everything he had built his life around, including the sermons he had preached and the ideals he had held so dearly. The community, too, felt the ripple effects. Michael's absence from the pulpit left a void that no one could fill. The church board held emergency meetings, torn between addressing the rumors and protecting their congregation's faith. For years, the Reeds had been a symbol of morality and leadership, but now their story had become a cautionary tale. Rachel, isolated and burdened by guilt, avoided the public eye, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. Charles's disappearance from the community fueled speculation, and though some tried to reach out to him, he remained elusive. His role in the betrayal left an indelible stain on his legacy, tarnishing the respect he had worked decades to earn. As the days turned into weeks, the Reeds' once esteemed reputation crumbled under the weight of the truth. What had been a family held up as an example of faith and strength was now seen as a fractured shell of what it had been. The Tampa community, stunned and shaken, struggled to reconcile the truth with the image they had once revered. For Michael, the fallout wasn't just about the loss of trust in his father or his wife. It was the loss of identity, the unraveling of the life he had worked so hard to create. And in the quiet moments of reflection, he was left with one burning question. How could he rebuild when everything he believed in had been destroyed? The fallout from the Reed family's implosion took an even darker turn when Michael's actions led him to the brink of no return. Consumed by the weight of betrayal and driven by an overwhelming sense of injustice, Michael made decisions that would change the course of his life forever. The night of his father's confrontation became the tipping point. As neighbors heard raised voices and the unmistakable sound of a struggle, it wasn't long before police were called to Charles Reed's St. Petersburg home. When officers arrived, they found Michael on the porch, his hands stained and trembling, his Bible clutched tightly in his lap. He didn't resist as they approached. "It's over," Michael said quietly, his voice calm but hollow. "Justice has been served." The scene inside the house was enough to make seasoned officers pause. The confrontation had escalated beyond words, leaving a vivid trail of violence and retribution. Charles, the man who had been both Michael's guide and his betrayer, lay motionless, the room bearing the scars of the final moments of their relationship. Michael was arrested that night, the weight of his actions bearing down on him. As the news broke, the story of the Reed family tragedy captured national attention. A respected pastor, driven by unimaginable betrayal, had turned against his own father in a moment of fury and anguish. The headlines were relentless, painting Michael alternately as a victim of circumstances and as a man who had crossed an unforgivable line. The trial began months later, drawing widespread media coverage. Journalists and spectators packed the courtroom, eager to witness the unfolding drama. The case wasn't just about the act of violence, it was about the deeper story behind it, one that challenged notions of morality, faith, and human endurance. The defense built their argument around the profound psychological impact of betrayal. They called on psychologists and counselors to testify about the emotional toll of discovering the truth about his father and the years of deception that followed. They painted Michael as a man pushed to the edge, his mental state frayed by the magnitude of what he had uncovered. Michael Reed is not a cold-blooded killer, his attorney argued in closing statements. He is a man who faced an unimaginable betrayal, a betrayal that shattered his faith, his family, and his very identity. What would any of us do if the people we trusted most turned out to be the ones who hurt us the deepest? The prosecution, however, focused on the premeditated nature of Michael's actions. They argued that while the betrayal he suffered was devastating, it could not excuse the violent choices he made. The gruesome details of the crime were laid bare for the jury, painting a stark picture of what had unfolded that night. Betrayal does not justify brutality, the prosecutor stated firmly. The actions taken by Michael Reed were not acts of self-defense or survival, they were acts of vengeance. And no amount of pain can make that right. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the emotional complexity of the case against the undeniable evidence of Michael's actions. The courtroom was tense as the verdict was read, guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, acknowledging the unique circumstances of the case but bound by the law, sentenced Michael to 25 years in prison. His decision was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it was too harsh for a man so clearly broken by betrayal, while others believed justice had been served. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy continued. Pundits debated the case endlessly, arguing about the limits of forgiveness, the consequences of betrayal, and the morality of Michael's choices. His story became a national conversation, a grim reminder of the thin line between love, trust, and devastation. For Michael, the trial's conclusion was not an end, but the beginning of a new chapter, one spent reflecting on the life he had lost and the choices he had made. From his prison cell, he wrote letters to his children, expressing his love for them and his hope that one day they would understand the depth of his pain. Whether they would forgive him was a question that hung in the air, unanswered. The Reed family's tragedy had torn apart a community, tested the boundaries of faith, and left a legacy of pain and unanswered questions. Michael's trial became a defining moment, one that forced everyone involved to confront the consequences of betrayal and the lengths to which a broken heart could go. The Reed family, once held in high regard as a model of faith and unity, had become a grim symbol of the devastating power of secrets. Their story reverberated far beyond the walls of their Tampa community, a chilling reminder of how betrayal could unravel even the strongest bonds. Michael's conviction and subsequent imprisonment left a void in his children's lives. The revelation that their beloved father was not their biological parent, and the horrifying circumstances surrounding their grandfather was a weight too heavy for their young shoulders. Isabel, the eldest at 16, struggled to reconcile her memories of a loving, supportive father with the dark truth that had come to light. She blamed herself for the DNA test project, believing it had been the catalyst for the family's downfall. Michael Jr., 14, grew quieter, retreating into himself as he tried to process the loss of the man he had looked up to. Jacob, 12, the once playful middle child, became withdrawn, his laughter replaced by silence. Olivia, at just 9, often cried herself to sleep, clutching a stuffed animal Michael had given her on her last birthday. Ethan, the youngest at 6, couldn't fully grasp what had happened, but felt the absence of his father deeply, often asking when he would come home. Separated by the state into different foster homes, the Reed children clung to their memories of better days. Letters from Michael arrived regularly, but his words, filled with love and regret, could do little to mend the broken pieces of their lives. Rachel, unable to maintain custody, was left alone to grapple with her guilt and the consequences of her actions. Isolated and ostracized, she became a ghost in the community she once served so passionately. The church, once a thriving pillar of the Tampa community, was left fractured in the wake of the scandal. Attendance dwindled as whispers and rumors spread, eroding trust in the institution that had been built on the Reed family's leadership. Some members expressed sympathy for Michael, seeing him as a man driven to the edge by unimaginable betrayal. Others were less forgiving, focusing on the violence that had tarnished his reputation and legacy. Charles's absence left an equally large void. Once a revered elder in the congregation, his name was now spoken in hushed tones, his actions serving as a dark shadow over the community. The man who had been a mentor to so many was now remembered as a betrayer, his decades of service overshadowed by the scandal that had destroyed his family. The broader community, once united by their admiration for the Reeds, was left divided. Some rallied around the children, offering support and assistance in their time of need. Others distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the family's fall from grace. The Reed home, once filled with warmth and laughter, stood empty, a stark reminder of what had been lost. As the years passed, the Reed family's story became a cautionary tale, shared in sermons and conversations about the dangers of hidden truths. It served as a reminder that even the most cherished relationships could be destroyed by secrets and betrayal. For Michael's children, the scars of those revelations would remain, shaping their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. In his prison cell, Michael spent his days reflecting on the choices that had brought him there. He wrote endlessly to his children, filling pages with apologies, prayers, and memories of the life they had once shared. Whether they would ever forgive him was uncertain, but for Michael, those letters were his only connection to the family he had lost. For the Tampa community, the Reed story remained a haunting reminder of how quickly the foundation of trust and love could crumble when built on hidden truths. It was a legacy no one wanted, but one no one could forget. Michael Reed's story is one that lingers long after the final chapter has unfolded. It is a story not just of betrayal, but of the profound impact that secrets can have on trust, love, and the very foundation of a family. What began as a seemingly perfect life, a life devoted to faith, family, and community, ended in heartbreak, destruction, and questions that may never be fully answered. This tale challenges us to reflect on the fragility of human relationships and the consequences of the choices we make when faced with unimaginable pain. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about forgiveness, justice, and the limits of what the human heart can endure. For Michael, the legacy he leaves behind is complex. To some, he will always be remembered as a man who was pushed beyond his breaking point, a father who loved deeply, but whose actions ultimately tore apart the family he cherished. To others, he is a cautionary figure, a reminder of the darkness that betrayal can unleash if left unspoken and unresolved. The Reed family's story is also a stark warning about the cost of hidden truths. Secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, have a way of surfacing, often with devastating consequences. The damage they cause can ripple far beyond the individuals involved, leaving a lasting impact on families, communities, and even faith itself. For Rachel, the weight of her choices will forever linger. Her silence, born of fear and shame, may have been an attempt to protect her family, but it ultimately contributed to its destruction. For Michael's children, their lives will be shaped by the scars of betrayal, their memories of a once perfect family tinged with pain and unanswered questions. And for the Tampa community, the story of the Reeds will remain a haunting reminder of the duality of human nature. The same people we trust to lead us, to guide us and to love us can also be the ones who hurt us the most. So what would you do if confronted with such a betrayal? Would you forgive and rebuild, or would the pain drive you to a breaking point? Could trust ever be restored, or would the weight of the truth be too much to bear? Michael's story leaves us with these questions, challenging us to reflect on our own capacity for forgiveness and the strength of the foundations we build our lives upon. It reminds us that no matter how perfect things may seem on the surface, the truth has a way of demanding to be seen, and the choices we make in those moments can define us forever. As the years pass, the legacy of the Reed family will remain, not as a simple story of right or wrong, but as a complex testament to the destructive power of secrets and the resilience required to face their aftermath. It is a tale that forces us to look inward, to question our own values, and to remember that trust, once broken, is the hardest thing to rebuild.